Good morning. Welcome to Woods and Water Wanderings. I'm Bob, and this morning we're going to look at some of the development or the history of fishing. As you see here, we have a little what's called the pocket fisherman. It came out in about the late 60s, early 70s, and this is just one of the things to look at, but I want to look at some of the aspects of where we have gone with the development of some of our fishing equipment, from a simple bait, reed-made bait pole and little simple reel like this, and on up to maybe some ultralight reels and some of the more technical level lines and such that were used down through the time that I began fishing anyway. I'm 70 years old this year, and started fishing when I believe I have a picture of myself fishing when I was around 4 years old. So I've been fishing for a few years and enjoy every aspect of fishing that we encounter. So let me get some things organized here, and we'll begin talking about or looking at some of the equipment that we have before us. As we begin, before I get to this pocket fisherman, which is an interesting little piece, but how effective it is, I don't know. We'll see later in the summer months when we take it out on the boat and see whether or not it really is an effective fishing tool. The 70 years ago, about the time that I would have started fishing, it wasn't quite old enough to be into the early reed and bamboo fishing poles with basic bait cast line reel, such as these. This is a split bamboo, very beautiful bait fishing pole, bait cast, little level wind. This one I believe is a Shakespeare Wonder Reel that's on here, about the appropriate time for this particular pole. But those were the beginnings, when they basically a reel was just simply something to store your line on. You pull the line out, and oftentimes they would take and hold it in one hand, such as this, swing the bait back and forth a little, let it flip out into the water, and then wait for the fish to bite. Or they would take a bait in one hand and they'd swing it around and let it go that way. This was just a repository, I guess you would say, to keep the line untangled and keep it in one place. So obviously not the greatest step up from just tying a line to a willow pole or a cane pole, but not something like we have today, where we have something along the lines of, a nice bait cast reel that you can press the button, throw it out, bring it back in. But as it developed, it went from this simple little line holder to the level wind bait casting or bait reel, and there were many different types. Here's a Green Hornet by Bronson. I don't know who that is. I don't remember that particular group. They even had cheap ones at different times. This is a newer one, and it's made by, or at least it's marketed by, Kmart. And the writing is so small I can't tell exactly what it is, but it was made in Japan, and basically you get just what you paid for from that particular group. But then there were some very good ones. This is a Pfluger Bond and that's a very beautiful reel. Nice mechanisms in it, and very good for possibly using with one of these boat or deck poles like this, called many different things, pier, deck, boat poles, but you notice how nicely that will fit on that particular pole. And this pole will come apart for storage, such as that, and you can carry that onto the pier where you're fishing, drop that over the side, and very effective fishing equipment. But eventually they began to develop the what's called a closed face spinning reel. Okay, the closed face in the sense that it's closed here, unlike the Bale reels that we have. This one is a Shakespeare Wondercast, and this is one of the earlier ones probably that were brought out. And Zebco did the same thing. They brought out their closed face, the little 202s, and we'll look at these in just a moment. And then there were other groups such as Daiwa. They came out with one. This is probably 1960s, 1970s, whereas this is a late 50s or early 60s reel. And this is the same, late 50s, early 60s. So these were step up. No longer did you have to take and throw your bait out by hand, but now you had a push button closed face spinning reel that you could just press the button, release it, and it would go. The type of pole itself was also interesting. Oftentimes there would be a metal reel seat. This is a Bristol, and this is a metal pole. It has a expandable tip or tips that pull out, and your reel would go in here. This ring would close down on it to keep it in place, like so. That was your fishing pole and reel. This is a wooden, not cork, it's a wooden handle, and many people had these. They liked the fact that they were collapsible poles and could be used. A little later on they began to use these solid fiberglass poles, and the solid fiberglass rod was a big improvement over the reed and such. Let me take this off. But they had, again, a metal reel seat, and you simply put your reel in like so, tighten it down, you're set to fish. Okay, this had a cork handle, and up here there's also an adjustable or a screw that would allow you to take it apart as such, and by taking it apart you could fix a broken reel or rod, I guess, if you wanted to, and so on. Probably shouldn't have taken that apart right there, but I did. There we go. And then we're put back together. There we go. So those were the earlier ones that we had available to be able to begin fishing from. You had to, most any hardware store would carry these fishing rods and these reels, and you could pick them up there for what was probably an exorbitant price, $15 maybe, or $12 or so, and for both the rod and the reel, and that was an exorbitant price at that time, because most of the people back about 60, 70 years ago were making a wage of about $3.50, $4.50 an hour, and so you worked a number of hours to make that kind of money. After that, it didn't change much, but again, you would get different types of reel seats on your solid fiberglass pole. It wasn't until probably the 70s that we began to get the hollow fiberglass poles, and then of course we got different composite ones, graphites and so on, that we were able to use. But for me, let me just look at these Zebco reels for a moment. There's enough reels here to give us a good example of some of the development over the ages of what came about in these closed-face spinning rod reels. Zebco made a very successful, especially successful reel when they made the Zebco 33. That was very popular, and it is a very beautiful reel. Works very well. I still have this fiberglass rod that I had used for years, and on it I had this particular Zebco combination. I enjoy fishing bass with that, and until I got some of the newer poles that I have now, this is what I used for years. Even broke the tip off this one and had to put a new tip on it at one point. But that made a very effective, a very good bass pole. Pickerel, caught pickerel on it, bullhead, all kinds of panfish, pike, all kinds of fish have been brought in on this particular combo. But as I was saying, Zebco had become quite successful in bringing out their close-faced, very simple close-faced reel. Now these are a little more complicated, as you see here. If I was to take it all apart, you'd see how complicated it was. But still quite a simple concept, but complicated with the number of gears and such that they put in this. This one doesn't want to come apart so easy. There we go. But as you can look in here, you can see there are quite a few gears and shafts and so on in there to be quite a well-made reel. Now if I can get that back on the right way, there we go. There. Now some people did not care for close-face reels, because once in a while line would get tangled inside and you'd have to take it apart. But that was on these better reels, such as this one, the 733 that Zebco made. They didn't do that very often. I got a couple of these 733s at one time when I was fishing off piers and stuff in saltwater, and it worked very well for that application as well. Bigger capacity, as you can see, and they work quite well for that application. But to begin with, they have everything from the Zebco 202, it doesn't show up well on that, but maybe it will on here. Zebco 202 all the way up here, like I said, up to the 733, a 404, a 33. But these 202s are about as simple a reel as could be made, and they were marketed as a child's reel for children because they were simple enough they wouldn't go wrong, and slightly different make to them than what the 33s and such were, but they aren't quite as complicated when you begin to take them apart and service them. But don't think that they were only for children, because I used to fish with an Adirondack fishing guide, and he was an older man and lived to be about 80, and he had one of these 202s, and he had one of the earlier 33s. He had these on his poles, and that's what he fished with. And he could have afforded a better one, but he didn't. He liked the simplicity of the Zebco reel, and he used that quite effectively to pursue his game fish. And basically what he would fish for were bass and bullhead. That was basically what he went for. Once in a while a pickerel would be caught, but that was his thing. So these little simple 202 Zebcos, as you can see, have developed differently over the years. I am thinking that this particular 202 is the earlier model. This is a little bit later model of the Zebco 202, and then of course this is a later one. This one probably from the, I would say this one came from the 60s or 70s, and this one probably 70s or 80s, and this one definitely came from in the 90s or maybe even into 2000. But they were very effective, very good, and I don't know too many fishermen that haven't had experience with the Zebco reel at some point. And some like them, some don't. Some don't care for them at all. But as the demand for a good reel became more and more, they made millions of these 33s, and these 33s are really well made. The early ones made with brass gears, and these later ones even have much brass in them, and these definitely have, very definitely have metal, no plastic on them in that respect. Of course, there's plastic on this area. These are newer ones. You can see here that they have a plastic seat at this point. The older ones have a metal one, such as this, or such as this, and so this places them a little bit older, and but these are newer ones, and yet these I have had for well over 20 years, and so they are still very useful, very good reel. One of the things that Zebco did was they put a larger handle on these. This one is probably the newer of the two 33s that I have. They put a larger handle, easier to grip, a little bit longer in radius that would be used to reel in, and a much wider. My hands, I wear. Okay, what I was saying before the camera failed on me and shut off. These larger handles on here fit my hand a lot better. I wear a size 18 ring, and so my hand is a pretty good sized mitt to be dealing with. Sometimes grabbing one of these smaller ones like so, trying to get a hold of that, and not only does it tire my hand out after a while, it sometimes is a difficult thing to grab a hold of. So a nice big one such as this makes it nice. Now you can't just, even though this is a Zebco, you can't just take these and take this handle off, put it on that, particular one. These might fit together, but this certainly is not going to go on one of the other ones, or vice versa. You know, you're not going to have that interchangeable parts. So keeping that in mind, sometimes you want to look at reels and find one that is comfortable to use. This would not be a bad one to use on Lake Champlain. Got good line capacity, good for, I wouldn't want to cast it all day. It's a significantly heavier reel than the smaller 33, but it is a good one if I was fishing for some big early pike or muskies. Maybe I would use something like this with a little heavier line, a little heavier equipment to deal with. One of the things I never have gotten into is I have never been a bait cast fisherman. I have just never used it. This is a relatively new one. I think it's still 15, 20 years old, but it's called Rhino again, and that's very 10 steps up from one of these Shakespeare level winds, and effective, I don't know. There are others such as this Shimano. This is a Bantam Shimano. Has a little push button, releases it, then star drag on it of sorts, and such. This has a little different line leveler, and is it effective again? Probably, if you can put it in the right hands. I'm just not a very good bait caster. I use a closed face reel or an open face reel, and that's what I learned on, and I don't know that I'm reluctant to learn a new one, but I'm a little too old to learn and get all new gear like that. Some of the ultralights that have been produced, not only did Zebco do that, like this Rhino that we have right here, but there are others as well. This is good for trout fishing. This is good for pan fishing or whatever, but trout fishing, especially on our streams here in the Adirondacks, these little short lines. This one is a 5.5-foot pole, not excessively long, but that's about as long as I want to try to maneuver through the brush in the Adirondacks here. And then you have one similar to this, which is a Shakespeare, and it's a 4.5-foot pole. And this is a little different. It has the finger release and then wind up. And one other one that I've had over the years that I have really enjoyed is this Daiwa. This one is about a 4.5-foot pole as well. Push button, reel up. I've used this for bass. Caught some nice 2.5, 3 pound bass with this. This is a pack rod. Comes apart in very small sections such as this. And by the time you get all these sections, you've got maybe a 12-foot, maybe a 15-inch, 12-inch or a 15-inch little packet that you can put in a pack or put in your pocket for that matter, and carry into some backwoods areas. But these are very good for fishing trout, and main reason I keep them and use them is for especially brook trout fishing in the Adirondack here. If you catch a big bass, a good sized bass on one of these ultralights, you have to play it a little bit differently, and you have to be careful, or you can very easily lose what it is that you are fighting for. Now, our look at these particular progression of things. Take a look at this again. We have a progression of what we saw 50s and 60s. You might have had a solid fiberglass rod that you used, put into a metal, white metal type of reel seat with a cork handle, and then it progressed on to becoming plastic, still fiberglass, solid fiberglass rod, a little bit thinner than some of those electric fence posts you'll find today, but it's about the same concept, and in a fiberglass or in a plastic reel seat, and then the whole concept began to change. Even for the closed face reels, they went to a straighter reel seat and handle, and that you can't use this for with a small entry eyelet. You can't use this for a spinning reel. It would get all tangled up, and the line coming down would snarl up here. This is strictly for close face spinning rod, the spinning reels, and but you see that you have room for some leverage on your forearm. You have a much better configuration in that respect for fighting the fish, and so the progress has come quite a ways. When you think back to this particular kind of an awkward setup, this is okay. I mean, you got some leverage there, and you could crank on a fish, but you know, a split bamboo, unless you're really into retro fishing and such, that would not be first choice, even though it has a fairly good tip, agate eyelets, all the way the tip is agate, all of the eyelets through it are agate, and a fairly solid tip to that particular pole. Now when you get to the older ones that were reeds, I mean, they look like a fly rod, but they're not. These are bait poles. I wouldn't want to crank too hard on a 3-pound bass with this thing. It probably would last, but then again, you might be sitting there with a 2 or 3 feet of the tip of your pole down in the water because it broke off. The other aspect that we have here are some of the gimmicks that they brought into fishing. And fishing, like golf or anything else, has its gimmicks. And let's get back to this pocket fisherman for just a moment. That pocket fisherman is kind of an interesting thing. It has 2 tips on here, as you can see, and your line comes out of here. You have to pull this down. Actually, I'd have to pull the line out for you. This comes apart. Let's get some line out here if we can find where the end of it is. I can't see it right offhand. This has never been used. I don't believe this particular, I got it at a yard sale for a little bit of nothing, and I don't believe it's ever been used, but I can't find the end of it now. But at any rate, you would pull out your line like you would any reel, slide it through this bushing here, like any other open face or closed face reel, and then you slide that back in, and you're all set. Pull your line out, put it down through this opening, close it, bring it up through here and here. Then when you fight a fish, it transfers the pressure from the top tip to the bottom tip, and as you can see there, it assists each other, and it's kind of an ingenious way of making a fishing pole. It assists each other and puts a little bit of weight so that this particular one isn't carrying all the weight and breaks off at any particular time. This is your button to cast with. You cast with it. You got a star drag, the whole thing. It's a functional fishing unit, I guess you would say. They even put in there a little case for spinner or a couple of hooks, split shots, whatever you might want to carry with you to use. Maybe even a small bobber could go in there. And here's a belt hook. You can hook it on your belt, I guess, if you want to trust that. It's not that heavy or big that you couldn't just hang on to it and keep it in your hand. Interesting little thing. Will it be effective as a fishing tool? Who knows? I don't know. I'll check it out. We'll take it on the boat at some point this summer and we'll fish with it. I'm sure we'll be able to catch a few perch or bluegill or sunfish or something with it. And whether it'll bring in a nice bass or a big pike, I don't know. I don't know that I'd want to handle a pike on this, 30-inch pike or so. That might be a little much to try to deal with. Also, we'll see how well it works mechanically in that respect and how well it stays together. I trust that this has been an interesting time for you, give you some insight into what some old man like myself, 69 years old, I'll be 70 this year, what we had to go through to get to the point where we could fish the way we fish today. We fish with some pretty modern stuff today. We don't deal with all these kinds of things, although I do use a Zebco 33 once in a while. Most of the time I'm using some pretty new open face reels and even some closed face reels, or fly rods. Those haven't changed too much over the years, but their basic concept is the same. And so trust that this has been a fun time for you, and I hope that you will join us, come back again when we look at some of the open face reels and some of the other equipment that we have. We've got a few that that I've picked up at yard sales or in different places, and they need to be refurbished a bit. We'll do that with a couple of the reels. The flugers and stuff like this, I have one open face fluger that these flugers this has got Bakelite on it, and it's not as old as in the 20s and 30s. This is after Shakespeare bought fluger probably, and still a good reel, very good reel, and one worth looking up. They aren't real collectible, I don't believe, you know, as far as money-wise goes, but maybe $15–20 for something like that. But still a very effective reel for maybe a boat rod or something where you're just letting you're looking for catfish or bullhead over the side of the boat. You're just letting your bait drift. Might be a very effective reel for that kind of fishing. But at any rate, I trust that you will come back and join us again, and next time when we look at the closed face reels and rods that we use, and maybe even some of the little specialty ones that they have for introducing kids and young people into fishing. We have a bunch of those at this point. Yes, you can spend hundreds of dollars on your rod and reel, unless you're a professional or you're fishing, 5 days a week. I don't see that that's necessarily any advantage for you. Some of the good $30, $40, $50 reels and some of the others that poles that we have today are very effective and very sufficient for the average fisherman. And I consider myself an average fisherman, probably as most of you do. Fishing is a time to be to have fun, to have a time of relaxation. It's not meant to be a high energy type of activity that ends up putting us into traction or something at the end. So I trust that you get out and you enjoy the woods and the water around you. You can find a lot of things by just wandering through the woods and wandering across the water to pursue fish or game, and to also have fun with what you encounter along the way. So if you like this, give it a like, a thumbs up, and if you we would like to have you subscribe and hit the notification so that you don't miss any of the videos coming up in the future, and you're able to come back and join us at that time.